those of you that are financially illiterate, a stock split does not make a stock less expensive. And I apologize for that misinformation being included in our business report that we just aired. I think most people understand what a stock split does, but it has nothing to do with the cost of a stock. It has to do with how they price individual units of the stock. I'll explain that in a moment, given the fact that many people get confused about these sorts of things anyway, and people correct me every time I make an error, so I'll correct other people when they do the same thing. Good afternoon, Milwaukee. This is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show on News Talk 1130 WISN. You heard that reference to Tesla splitting 5-for-1. This does not make the stock less expensive. The stock of Tesla is not affected by a split in the price in terms of how expensive it is. The way a stock split works is, let's imagine a stock is trading at $500 a share. If you do a 5-for-1 stock split, you simply get 5 shares of the stock, now valued at $100. It makes it easier for an individual who is not of sufficient means to buy 1 share of stock because they'd only spend $100, but they haven't gotten anything that is cheaper than they were getting before because that stock is now valued at only 20% of what the original share was valued at. It'd be no different than if you went to a grocery store and they had a box of, in fact, I now see this. I think probably because of all the people that are like me, unmarried. See, go to the grocery store, you see all the boxes now that just have 6 eggs? I never saw that before. Have you seen that? The boxes with 6 eggs. You don't go to the grocery store, do you? Up where you go. You go to like these Costco's where the boxes have 890 eggs in them, and stock up and freeze the thing and carry them forever. You know, let's suppose there's a dozen eggs for, what do eggs even cost? It's the other thing I don't know anymore. I just grab the stuff and throw it into the basket and put the credit card into the thing when it's over with. What does a dozen eggs cost? Do you know? You don't know that either? When is the last time you grocery shopped? That's why I asked. When is the last time you grocery shopped? What? No, when was the last time you grocery shopped? A week ago. You don't do the whole household. When's the last time you think you bought eggs? A year. Well, okay. Well, I buy them all the time, and I admit I don't know what they cost. That might be a sign that I make too much money. I don't know. Paul says he thinks they're about $2.50. I get the jumbo though. Why would anybody get those small eggs? That's another question I have. Do you know the answer to that? Well, no, but why do you get the small eggs? Why not get the jumbo? You get more that's the bang for the buck. I always buy the jumbo. The jumbo are often sold out, then you buy the extra large. I think women probably buy like the medium. Anyway, let's suppose they sell a dozen eggs for $2.50. You might get a box of 6 of them for $1.25. That doesn't mean that the box of 6 is less expensive. It simply means that they're pricing them at a smaller unit that's out there. So anyway, that whole thing of stock splits has been a controversial thing, kind of an interesting story to comment on. There are some companies, most of the tech companies simply do not believe in splitting their stock. They don't think that it affects the ability of individuals to purchase the stock when it has a high stock price. Warren Buffett, for example, Berkshire Hathaway, has famously opposed ever splitting his stock to the point that they ended up issuing the main stock of Berkshire Hathaway got into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they issued this new class of stock that was a fraction of that, and now that thing has exploded through the roof. But most of the other big tech companies like Amazon and so on simply don't believe in splitting the stock. Tesla apparently has chosen to do so. You've got all these micro investors now, these kids that are going out there and they'll throw their money in. I think the company's named Robinhood, where they'll pool their money into a big basket of things, and they end up buying fractional shares of stock. I'd like to criticize it and say that it's stupid, but I guess it's better than nothing. If it's fueling just people speculating and buying something today and day trading it tomorrow, it's not a good idea. But if it's a way for people who don't think that they have enough money to invest in the stock market or invest in anything to get in and do something at all, I think it's probably better than, not doing anything. The same thing's happening in horse racing. There's an outfit out there. Again, it's the sort of thing I'd like to criticize, but I can't criticize it because it kind of makes sense. You could buy a horse for $200. Well, I mean, actually, you could buy an actual horse for $200. That horse wouldn't be any good, but you could buy a horse for $200. You can buy a micro share of a top racehorse, like a horse that's going to run in the Kentucky Derby in a couple of weeks, for a few $100. There's this outfit called My Racehorse Cobb. I don't want to give them a free plug, but that's what they do. They'll divvy the horse up into thousands of shares, so you own way less than 1%. And because of computerization, in the past, the reason this was difficult to do is you'd have to have bookkeepers that would have to expense out everybody's share of this, that, and the other thing and parcel out the profits, and it was just too big of a pain in the butt to do. But these things can now be pretty much automated and computerized and almost done automatically. So some of these horses end up with thousands of owners who own like way less than like 1/10 of 1% of the horse, and they'll run around and they're telling people, yeah, I got a horse that's in the Kentucky Derby, which sort of drives you crazy. I buy percentages of horses myself. I'm usually somewhere between 5 and 10 or 15% in terms of what I would buy. And that allows me to say that this is my horse. But when you hear people say, I have a horse in the Derby, and you find out that they have 1/10,000th of 1% of it, I mean, they sort of do. Again, I don't really see a downside. And from the perspective of people that are trying to get people interested in horse racing, it does get them more interested. These people that own this miniature micro fraction of the share, they follow the horse and they pay attention to it. And maybe eventually they go on and get more deeply involved and, become a full owner of a horse for a larger percentage and so on. But that's a big thing that's out there, and it's kind of driven by the combination of young people and the ability technologically to do these things, which in the past had been very, very hard to do. I've gotten a lot of reactions since we were talking about the Tesla story to that story that I mentioned on Lucid. And what happens right now is when I bring up something like this, and people don't know what it is that I'm talking about, they all do the same thing. They all run off and they Google, and people are now asking me if Lucid is going to have dealers. That's going to become my first topic on the program. With the shakeout that's going on in the economy because of COVID-19, we're seeing all sorts of changes in industries, and probably the biggest one is retailing. There's a compelling story out today suggesting that Midtown Manhattan is going to become essentially a depression. That almost all the retailers that low-cap stores in New York right now are going to close them because it simply isn't worth it to pay the incredible costs of having a brick-and-mortar retail store on Fifth Avenue or Madison Avenue, or even in some of the neighborhoods like Soho and Greenwich Village and so on. That the foot traffic doesn't justify it, that there's no end in sight to the lockdowns that are in place in New York. New York declaring itself so hostile to tourists eliminates the foot traffic that's out there as well, and the belief that so many people in New York who they've had no choice to adapt to having things come via delivery since the stores have been closed in New York, that now that they've done this, they're never going to gravitate back in the opposite direction, one area changing retailing. So I want to pick up at that point and talk about the whole automobile dealer experience as well. As you know, I am struggling to deal with topics on the program that are not all the doom and gloom stuff and try to get us on the cutting edge of kind of being ahead of everybody else on some of these things that are going on. So let's right now give you the Sizzling Summer Cash Contest. Text in word for this hour. The word is love. L-O-V-E, love. Still fascinated. Last time you fully grocery shopped is a year ago. You don't know how lucky you are. You really don't know how lucky you are. Do you know how lucky you are? Do you know how terrible grocery shopping is? Well, no, it's. Well, yeah, Paul says you got to wear. You have a bigger problem with the masks than I do. I think that's fairly obvious. But you don't. Well, except don't you have your asthma excuses? What? You don't wear one. Well, but I know. So what? So you actually have no problem with the mask requirement. Why would that keep you out of the grocery store? You hate going into the stores to begin with, and you don't like having to throw the asthma excuse out, right? Have you tried to go into a Walmart or one of the stores have you tried to go into one of those yet? A Target, yeah. And you just said asthma and they said fine? Oh. All right, let me finish off the word. Love, L-O-V-E, loves. Text that into 200-200 anytime between now and 4 o'clock. By the way, we failed yesterday. I was determined to get a winner on the program yesterday, and, well, I didn't fail. The audience failed. Not my fault, is it? You know how these contests work? When we have a winner, I take credit. When we don't have a winner, I blame the audience or Paul. Let's try again. Love, text that into 200-200. Everybody do it now. You got to, anytime between now and 4 o'clock, text that in. You get a text confirming entry plus iHeartRadio info, standard data, and message rates apply in this nationwide contest. Without regard to how long COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions go on, without regard to whether or not eventually Americans simply decide that they have to adapt to it, and without regard to whether or not the virus goes away or gets worse, without regard to any of those things, we have made significant changes in our way of life just in 5 months. Some of those things I think people hate. Others of them, I think you're getting a pretty strong impression that a lot of people like them. Now, Paul and I were just talking about the grocery shopping thing. I'm going to get to the automobile dealer experience because I wonder if there are going to be any car dealers in 15 years. I really do. I don't know, but I wonder. I don't like to grocery shop. On the other hand, 75% of the things I do in life, I don't like to do. That's what life is. For all these people that are, that are always complaining about how unfair life is, most things in life you don't like to do, right? What percentage of the things that you do you like to do? It's less than half, isn't it? What? Do you like brushing your teeth? You do? You look forward to brushing your teeth. I mean, I like the fact that it's done and your mouth tastes better after, but I don't like, you like doing that? Oh, you've got a Sonic here. You are so much more ahead of me on this. I'm doing my decluttering and all of this stuff now, and people are just looking at me. They're acting like I live in Abe Lincoln's days in terms of my technology. I mean, they're like, why do you still have speakers? What, there's another way to do it? What's this thing, Sonos or whatever that everybody's yapping about? That's one of many. Well, it's one of many that I'm told that I need to have and not have. Speakers and wires and this. So now you've got a toothbrush, and it's such a cool toothbrush. It's a Sonic. What does that mean, a Sonic toothbrush? Sonic Air. I don't know anything about this. It's got a timer. I go into the Walgreens and I buy a toothbrush that says soft on it. Are you telling me that your toothbrush buzzes or does it just shut off after 2 minutes? It shuts off after 2 minutes. Well, that's like having your wife in that's like when you're a kid, your mother in there making sure that you keep brushing it longer. Well, I guess you could stop earlier. You press a button to turn it off, but it doesn't make you do it any longer than that. So he says he enjoys brushing. I don't enjoy brushing my teeth. I am glad to brush my teeth and glad that I'm done with it, but I don't. Okay. All right, it's time to get up in the morning. Oh, I get to brush my teeth. You're apparently very easy to please in there. Well, you probably don't wash the dishes, so that's not something that you do. You put them in the dishwasher. Do you like doing that? No, see, I'm just saying if you run down the list of things that you have to do during the course of a day, most of them are things that do you like driving to work? You do? Because you go through your playlist. Well, you apparently have figured out a way. You're just like, so like if you have to go to the can right now, are you happy? Are you enjoying doing that? Actually, the older you are, the bigger the deal that becomes. It's just like so excited that you're able to do it. How did we get off doing this? I'm trying to lighten the show up. I gave out the word. I'm going to comment on the intellectual and ideological bigots up there in Germantown. President of the school board is on me now for daring to draw attention to the fact that if you criticize Black Lives Matter, they're going to fire your ass up there. He said, the president of the school board says, I know you're just an entertainer. They always think that that's like the biggest insult to me. I get that all the time, but I get that whenever somebody wants to mock the show, there's some bozo up there who runs the school board named Soderbergh. And he says, I understand you're just an entertainer. That's what he's saying, because he doesn't think that I should criticize them for trying to get rid of anybody that's not a left-wing radical up in Germantown. So this guy Soderbergh, I understand. You're just an entertainer. And I've gotten that over the years in the past. It's their attempt to insult me. And I'll get it when Tim Sheehy of MMAC said it like 20 years ago. I put him on the program and I made him explain it. Remember that? You don't remember that. You know, well, you're just an entertainer. You're just an entertainer. You're just an entertainer. You're just an entertainer. First of all, I'm glad people think that my show is entertaining. I try very hard to make it entertaining, but that's not all the show is. For instance, I think Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham and Tucker and all of them, I believe they are entertainers. They try to make their show entertaining, but they also want their program to be informative. And in the case of my program, were it not for some of the information that I put out, a lot of people would not necessarily know what goes on in the community, like the fact that they brought in a school superintendent from west of Madison, an athletic director from Franklin, and they've decided to run around and troll around on social media to get rid of part-time coaches who say things that they don't like, which is not all that shocking in Madison or Shorewood, but quite enlightening that this kind of left-wing bullying is going on in a community like Germantown. Now, if it's entertaining that I just said that, yes, I'm an entertainer. But if it's informative that I just said that, I consider that part of my role as well. So whenever they try to insult me by saying I'm an entertainer, it's like, you know, when I'm out in public, occasionally people will rip on me, and until this recent thing where the left has just gotten really ugly about everything. If I was out in public and somebody yelled at me, I mean, dollars to donuts, it's a teacher. It's so easy to predict. And it's part of the same thing that we've seen, I think, right now with some of the protests that are going on. Teachers believe that they can just do things that other people can't do. And they believe that they're the most put upon people in the world and so on. And, you know, I've developed my own set of retorts that have come up over the years, and I know the kinds of insults that drive people really, really crazy. So they think when they're insulting me that I'm not going to have a better comeback for them that's going to make them more hacked off. Furthermore, I'm actually serious. I'm not sure there actually is an insult that somebody could give me right now that I would care about. Is there anyone that you think I haven't heard? I mean, listen. You got a big nose. No kidding. Boy, you're perceptive. You think I hadn't picked up on it in all these years that I got out there? I try to turn my head around and I can't see around the corner if I got my big honker in the way. You get the insults from, well, that's really effective. Like you're gonna, oh my goodness. Somebody just told me, Mark, what do they tell you about me? He's obnoxious SOB. They'll tell you, I bet that just crushes you. I bet you want to go home and cry underneath because what do they think we are? That like 11-year-old kids being insulted on Facebook? I've had every possible thing that there is that's said about me. But so there may be something someone could say that could insult me, and it's not like I have no sensitivity at all, and it's not like that I don't have it. I just saying that, you know what it is? I'm vaccinated. That's what it's like the COVID thing. You develop an immunity when you've been called obnoxious, a blowhard, a big mouth, a bigot, a this, that, and the other thing, and then on physical appearance, every name in the book forever and ever and ever. After a certain point, okay, you're a fat slob, Trump says the same situation. Yeah, Trump actually seems to relish in it, doesn't he? I think he likes to be insulted. Trump is one of those guys that it's actually going so far that it actually somehow feeds his whole. No, the other thing, if I'm insulted in public, it's usually a woman and not a man, and it's more often than not a teacher. If you'd be out in public and so on, and again, I just think so I've developed a series of retorts that I can throw at, say, a woman who says, and I don't do it unless somebody is really, really over the top and obnoxious and just, sickening and stupid and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've had friends that I've been out with and their jaws just always drop. They said, I can't believe that person would just say, welcome to it over here. And I just think that I'm not saying never, virtually never happens the other way. I think almost never does a conservative see a prominent liberal out there in public and go up and just insult them and tell them. I didn't say it never happens. People say, I just think that 95% of the time, it's somebody from the left saying the insulting thing towards someone from the right. 95% of the time. It's the same thing with the protest. It's the same thing with I love this Vaughn Mays is saying that, the whole problem with the situation in Wauwatosa Saturday night is that Mensa should have stayed inside the house. It's his house and his yard. Well, he should have just stayed in there when we were toilet papering his house and throwing the rocks in the window. And then what's he doing bringing his dog outside? It's his yard. But I'm telling you, this is how liberals actually do sort of think, that they should be able to do whatever it is that they want to do, but nobody can ever respond to anything that they have to say. We're wandering far afield here, but we were getting into just general insults that if a woman calls you, I've had every name in the book. There is one that they just can't handle. I'm not going to say it here because there's no reason. Well, is it the big one? Well, it is the big one, but how do I know if you know that it's the big one? No. I would never say that word. No, I'm just saying there's a certain insult that you can give to an obnoxious woman that you're on the right track. You're on the right track, and it just completely takes them aback. And it's hard for them to say that it's a terrible thing that you just said, because everything that they just said to me is 150 times worse than that. Anyway, let me redirect and get back to where we were with regard to the changes that I think are happening in retailing and the things that we're not going to return to. And I got off on the grocery store thing, that I can't get myself yet to the point of having groceries delivered. And that's just probably because of age, for the same reason that there are some 85-year-old people who still don't know how to go on the internet, that you get to a certain point where you can't warm up to doing things. But the other thing for me is and I'm sure it's a function of never having been married. And for that matter, just always having to fend for myself. My means of grocery shopping is the same means that every other single man that I know grocery shops. Do you know how single men grocery shop? No, but do you know what our MO is? We go through the store to see what we need. We don't make a list. I'm guessing women, moms with families and 3 kids, they have to organize it in a list, and they'd always forget things. Your wife has the photo, has her photo and all that. And I think I see some younger millennials that'll be working off of a list or something or other. But a guy like me, I have in my mind, and if there's something I really need, I kept saying I've never written it down, but we run up and down the aisles. Okay, do I need this? Do I need that? Do I need the other thing? To me, that's quicker than spending 15 minutes at home making the list. I'm thinking I could just do the list while I'm in the store by grabbing the stuff that I need. So my whole thing on the delivery is I would spend as much time making out the list as I actually am going, and then I got to go into the thing and check the box for what kind of brand, as opposed to just in the store. Okay, this bag of broccoli looks good, grab it and throw it into the thing. So, still, it's clear that many people have adapted to this new way of doing things. The same thing with regard to ordering food from fast food restaurants. The other night I ordered something from Panera. Now, this was kind of out of necessity. It was right before it was going to close, and they have a 10-minute window for the online ordering. In other words, you can pick it up within 10 minutes. So I got the order in 12 minutes before they were going to close, and I slapped the thing in there and got in the car. I was there about 7 minutes later, and I was ready, and they grabbed me the bag. And I'm thinking, this is way better than standing there and waiting for them. It was a salad, so that is probably prepackaged, but it's better than coming in there and then waiting the 5 minutes while they go through it or standing in the line. You go in, you put the credit card, you grab the bag, and you leave, and you get out of the store. I'm guessing I would probably do something like that in the future. Many people, including me, have long since moved away from trying to go to department stores and so on, and instead buy a lot of things via Amazon. That was a permanent change once it kicked in terms of our behavior. Anyway, now, contemporary society, because of A, COVID-19, and B, the almost suicide that many of the big cities are committing. I mean, I think Chicago's committing suicide. I think Portland is committing suicide. I think Seattle is committing suicide. These communities are destroying their downtown central business districts and shopping areas. New York is probably in that same category. For those of you who are not aware, Chicago, which had terrible rioting downtown, shortly after the George Floyd situation a couple of months ago, had another terrible round of it again. The area of North Michigan Avenue, often called the Magnificent Mile, was smashed out and gutted again. And this was after many of these stores have spent an estimated tens of millions of dollars to restock their inventory after the rioting that occurred and looting that occurred in May. Many of these department store chains literally restocked not mention, fix the stores up and put the windows back in and put the fixtures back in. They had to restock from their warehouses all of the stuff that had been gone, and now they're cleared out yet again. If this is something that's simply going to happen every few weeks, it's not only going to be a situation of many shoppers are not going to be willing to go and make the weekend shopping trip to Chicago to go to Michigan Avenue and so on. It's going to be impossible to do it because after the looting occurs, it takes them weeks to fix the stores back up. They're just going to be closed for extended periods of time. The same thing in New York. There's an interesting story in today's New York Times. Every now and then they'll come up with something. It's once in a blue moon, and today must be the blue moon. You don't even know what a blue moon is, do you? You know what a blue moon is? I think I know, but I might be wrong. I like to throw out the wrong answer just so people call you to correct, and then I never actually put the correct thing out there. That's what I was explaining to Dave Michaels, that some of these things we just had I did the thing about the bar argument thing. Sometimes it's better not to know the answer because the whole point of the whole upside of it is to argue about it and not actually know. Yeah, that's the fun of it. It's, rock and roll stuff was kind of like that too. You'd argue about certain things with a band you didn't really want to know, but probably because both people were wrong. But it would still, some idiot rolls out the phone and then that's the end of that. And now you got to sit there. There's nothing else. There's nothing to do for the next 20 minutes. No wonder millennials don't ever talk, that they just text, because, people of my generation, we just argue pointlessly forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. But that's how we develop our arguing skills. Whereas these people, they just pull out the answer and they're offended if somebody says that they're wrong about anything, as opposed to, yeah. Isn't a blue moon when there's 2 moons in a month? I don't know. No, don't Google it because I don't want to know. But you are going to have people that are going to tell you, and I'm still not going to want to know. I thought a blue moon is when there's 2 moons in the same month. In other words, a moon is every 28 days. So if you have, for example, a full moon on the 1st, you're going to get another one on the 29th of that month, but it has to happen where the first full moon would come up early in the month. I thought that's what a blue moon is, but that might not be right. The other thing a blue moon is? It's that beer that you put the orange in. It is good beer, but now I stopped drinking beer because of the carbs and all of that stuff. But the other thing that I noticed, when I was going to Brewer games, I started, remember the good old days, Paul, when they had a Brewer game and you could go? How many years ago was that now? Doesn't that I watched the Brewer game last night, and the thing that's kind of sad about it is I'm sort of getting used to it. That nobody in the stands, and it doesn't even seem all that abnormal already. So if they actually ever do allow us to go back, will that seem abnormal to go into the game and sit there or not? Well, so I started ordering the Blue Moon, and I noticed that it didn't take much, and I'm like half bombed. Do you know that it's got a higher alcohol content than the other beers? Well, I didn't know that until I was curious enough to, something's going on here. Oh, there it is, 5.7 or whatever it was that was on there, Blue Moon. So are people bothering you with what a blue moon is? You just don't want to hear it, do you? So you got Chicago callers, blue moon callers. See, you don't want to talk to these people. I know that. You have to. That's your job. Start talking to them. Yeah. Then when he talks to them, I yell at him for getting distracted when he talks to them. I'm trying my best here. Some people are going to say that this is obnoxious. I am trying to lighten the load on the show because there are going to be things coming up on the program that are not lightened, including our discussion of exactly what categorization are we going to allow Kamala Harris to put herself in as she tries to tick every diversity box that's out there. It's kind of a fascinating question, and it's actually being asked today more on the left than on the right. What is an African American? Does the term have a meaning? Is it a race? Is it an ethnicity? Or is it merely, as some people are now describing, where you can pick your own gender, is it merely a way that individuals self-identify themselves? I don't know the answer to any of these questions because I would prefer that we would all think of ourselves as American. Anyway, I knew this would drive you crazy. Paul's already exasperated. You're exasperated. I kind of wanted this to happen. Now, I feel badly that it happened. Now, Paul literally threw up his hands and he's flailing away, and I think you might have flipped somebody off in there. I am right about the blue. It's one of those things that, why would I think that unless that's what it is? I mean, it's like if you ask me to name your middle name and something, I think I know what it is, but why would I think if I'm wrong, why would I have the wrong middle name? Can I say it or not? It's Robert, isn't it? Yeah, see, no, I don't know why I know that, other than you must have been on something or another. I saw it once, and if that popped into my head, if it was like George, why would the other one be in there? So I am right about the blue moon. So you're still going to have people that will argue and call up and claim that I'm not right about the blue moon, even though I am right about the blue moon. People are complaining that speedways. Well, how long nobody's been given change out for 6 weeks. They're just picking up on this. A lot of stories. Well, people, I'm perfectly fine with it. Are you okay with that? What are they supposed to do? They don't have any coins. Do you know how hard it is to get coins right now? Paul says nobody. Well, I'm never going to get to the Lucid. Remember this? You wonder why this show doesn't end until midnight. Rush is open. I know all about Open Line Friday. They explained to me that Open Line Friday was not Open Line Friday. I kind of knew that, but they said, what? You think our call screeners aren't still screening calls? You think that anybody could just call up and deal with such and such? Now, they would throw in the occasional oddball call, but if they didn't want to put them on the air, they didn't put them on the air, whether it's Open Line Friday or not. And they said, look, you can direct 3 or 4 topics, and those will be the only ones that we'll give you, even though we'll call it Open Line Friday. A lot of the guests, when I was doing guest hosting, Rush, a lot of them didn't do Open Line Friday, but I thought that I should, that the audience was used to it. Plus, I liked that goofy little sounder that they played. Hey, it's Open Line Friday. I just liked playing that. Yeah, because we don't have any of that stuff here because you won't make any of it. I mean, our sounders were that thing that we used to play from John Wyatt coming in which it sounded like that the world was exploding. I didn't like our sounders. We did change that, but I like that one that they had over there. No. First of all, hardly anybody pays cash anymore. So in order for there to be a lot of coins have to circulate. And coins aren't circulating as much because people are not using coins to pay in the first place. So what coins that we have out there are kind of sitting around sort of dead. And a lot of the retail stores are having a hard time getting coins also. I don't know why this is. It would seem to me that it would have to work out equally. People are likelier to expect coins and change than to pay for something with a coin. For example, if your price is $7.23, you're likelier to give $8 than you are $7.23. So a lot of the retailers simply can't get their hands on enough coins, and many of the banks are refusing to provide them. You go to a bank right now and just say, give me a roll of 20s and so on. A lot of them have stopped doing it because they can't get the coins either. The Mint has been backlogged on orders for coins, and they're having a hard time figuring out how many to produce anyway because there isn't such a need for coins anymore in the exchange because so many people are paying for things with plastic. The other thing that's going on, and this is harder to get a feel for, but there are a lot of people who believe that with the inflation of base metals, and when I say base metals, like the ultimate raw metal, nickel is a base metal, and copper sort of is, zinc especially the really, really cheap metal, the stuff that frankly, the stuff we put in coins, that inflation is getting to the point that those coins are going to be worth more melted than the actual face value of the coin, especially with pennies and nickels. And some people, it's believed, we don't know this, it's believed that some people are hoarding them in fear that we're going to have extreme inflation of commodities. So between the hoarding that's going on and just fewer people are going out to buy things, and then when people do buy, take the gas station as an example, I think, what percentage do you think pay at the pump? 60? Am I low? I see some people going in, and I think they're going in because they only want to charge a certain amount. In other words, set the thing for $20 or $15 and so on. When I occasionally go into a gas station, it's only because I'm buying something that they sell inside the convenience store. And I'll see some people say, give me $15 on pump 15 or something or another. And the other thing that people go into gas stations for is they buy cigarettes. But there's just a shortage of coins that's out there right now. And there's a shortage of almost every type of coin. It might correct now that silver finally pulled back yesterday, but the American Eagle silver coins, that's the coin that the government actually issues, an ounce of silver. You can't get them right now. You simply can't get from the government suppliers the 2020 American Eagle silver that they're back ordered out the wazoo because of the incredible demand in the price of silver. So that's what's going on with the coins. But if the stores don't have it, I mean, as long as you know it in advance, I think that it would be wrong if it's not posted. But if they post that we don't give change, well, they don't give change. Well, that's what I'm saying, and that's part of the problem. And I think that this is going to become the new reality. And I think that the other thing is you'll see at a lot of stores when you go in, we need 10s and 20s. You see that on the cash register? They have no 10s and 20s. They just don't. Or actually, I think it's 10s. I know a lot of them have 20s because they still have to cash the occasional 100 when they go in. And the convenience stores actually prefer you to pay in cash because they're on such a thin margin. When they get, credit cards, it's either, 2.5% or 3%, and 3%, or is it 3.5% and 4%? Visa and MasterCard, I think, is 2.5%, and I think American Express is 3%. I might be off by a point on that. But yeah, the credit card companies make their money off of the processing fee that they charge the retailers. So especially the retailers that are on the thin margin, they would prefer to get the cash. But in terms of the coins, there's a shortage of it. In Milwaukee, most of the parking meters now don't even take coins. You just do it through the app. Well, you never used cash anyway. That blew you 25 years ago. You told me you'd have no cash in your pocket. I was always shocked by that. You were ahead of everybody. How could that be? You're not ever ahead of everybody. You just never had cash because you were one of those guys that, well, like when you go to lunch, you could, I don't have my cash with me, Back where I was, changes in the retailing environment, some of which might well be permanent. I want to finish off before I go to the break, and then I'll get to Lucid. The New York Times story, where there is serious concern that there may be an economic collapse in New York in terms of the value of the real estate. In New York City, for any of you who've ever been there, once you're in Manhattan, really anywhere in Manhattan, even lower Manhattan down to Soho, Greenwich Village, the financial district, the buildings are almost all the same. Retailing on the ground floor and offices or residential above. The offices have been empty for months because almost all of them have been shut down. The people are just holed up either in the apartment buildings or living out in the other boroughs where they reside. And a lot of people who work in Manhattan live in Queens, live in Brooklyn, etc., live out in the suburbs, and they take the train or the bus or the subway or something to get into work. So New York itself, the people who live there, they're just in their apartments holed up because the offices remain almost entirely closed. In the meantime, there's been virtually no travel to New York because there's no business travel because all the office buildings are closed. Tourism is down to almost nothing because of the quarantines that were put in place, and just about everything that a tourist would want to go to in New York is shut down. The Broadway shows are still shut down. The sports are shut down. There's almost no reason I can think of for anybody to go to New York if you're a tourist. So for that reason, the retail stores, even those that have tried to reopen in New York, have no foot traffic whatsoever. Their costs, however, are the highest, among the highest in the world. The rent on Fifth Avenue, the rent on Madison Avenue per square foot is staggering. You would pay more on a couple of wakes in rent per square foot than you might pay at the same location, say in Brookfield, in an entire year. So their fixed costs are enormous, and then add to the fact that they have tremendous real estate taxes and other taxes that are out there, add no foot traffic at all. But the prospect that the foot traffic isn't going to come back. How many of those giant office towers in New York are going to remain shuttered forever? How many of those companies that switch to a work-at-home mode for their staff attorneys and their accountants and all the other people pushing paper around in there, are they simply going to decide we don't need to pay these rents to rent out 7 floors in a skyscraper? We'll simply have people work at home, that they may never come back. In terms of the tourism component, New York is getting back to the New York of the 1970s. The crime rate is exploding out of control after it being such a safe city. In terms of Broadway reopening, can anybody even imagine Broadway reopening? I mean, New York, this is, de Blasio is the king of the shutdown. It may be a long, long, long time. And in the meantime, the residents of New York have learned it's just as easy to buy all of these things online because all their stores have been closed. They've had no option. And the tourist trade, that's kind of shot too. People who used to perhaps, okay, we're going to go to New York and go on a shopping trip. They haven't had the ability to do so, and all of the upsides that the New York used to have, and New York had upsides. The upside in New York is that you could do just about anything. There was Broadway. There were all the shows. The shopping was spectacular. It was unbelievably safe. The city was other than the garbage that they lay on the streets at night, relatively clean. There was the vibe and the excitement of New York, but all that's gone. So brick and mortar retailing, I'm not going to say is dead, but in the major American, just take a look at Chicago and Michigan Avenue. It could literally be dead and never come back. If there's going to be looting every month and it takes them 3 weeks to complete the looting, no store, Tiffany's, all of those, look at the merchandise that Tiffany's lost in this looting. You can't even calculate what it actually is, and people are taking bricks and smashing through those glass plates, and then take some of the smaller retailers that clothing is taken out of. The Nike store was all smashed up. Marshall Fields got gutted out again, or not Marshall Fields, whatever they call Marshall Fields, the Macy's. They got gutted out again. Some of those chains are simply going to say, we can't afford to keep reopening here. We end up restocking, costing us a fortune, but it never turns out into sales because it all gets stolen. This is self-inflicted suicide that these cities are committing. Anyway, as we consider changes in the way that consumers buy things, moving more to a stay-at-home mode and moving more to doing things online, if you're an automobile manufacturer and a new one, are you going to follow the lead of Ford and Chevy and Nissan, the model that they've used forever, sell your cars through dealers? Or are you going to follow the lead of Tesla and say, we're not going to operate any dealerships. We're just going to keep all the money ourselves? As new competitors come into Tesla, this is now becoming an interesting question, and that's after an incredible amount of buildup where we're going with all this. News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. Let me quote a couple of paragraphs in that story in the New York Times dealing with the likelihood of a retail disaster in Manhattan. Quote, there's no reason to do business in New York. I can do the same volume in Florida in the same square feet as I would have in New York, with my expenses being much less. Interesting comment for those of you who've been to any of the major cities in Florida. A lot of them have very, very glitzy and lavish retail spaces. Some of those malls are really nice. The point that this retailer is making is they can do the same amount of business in some of those stores in Florida, and their fixed costs are radically less. He continues, the expense of being in the city has overtaken the marketing group that says you have to be there. Interesting comment again. A lot of the marketers are saying, look, you have to be in New York because it's almost like an ad for your chain by having that store there. In other words, even if somebody doesn't buy anything from Tiffany's, they walk past the Tiffany and they see the Tiffany store and it creates an image in their head. It's just, in other words, if you're not in New York, you're not anywhere if you're a retailer. This retailer is quoted in the New York Times as essentially saying the advantage of that is outweighed now by the incredible cost associated from being there. They continue. The story continues. In Manhattan's major retail corridors, from Soho to Fifth Avenue to Madison Avenue, once packed sidewalks are now nearly empty. A fraction of the usual army of office workers goes into work every day. And many wealthy residents have left the city for second homes. In New York City, there is next to no lunch business, he said. Think about that. How'd you like to operate a restaurant in New York right now? In New York City, the lunch business is as big a deal as the dinner business because there's so many workers that are there. There is no lunch business. All these all the offices are closed, so therefore the population that would go down and walk out of the building to go have lunch here, there, or the other thing, there is none of it. Story continues. No one's coming in from Connecticut. No one's coming in from New Jersey. And there are no tourists wandering the street, he added. Again, that might be a permanent situation in New York, and there was a time I felt during the COVID thing that it would dawn on de Blasio, the mayor of New York, as an idiot, that whatever the risks that he saw with COVID, that the downside of killing off your economy forever, killing off the restaurants, killing off the offices, killing off the retailers, the long-term consequence that you'd be better off just riding out whatever the downside was of COVID. But that's not been the case. They remain essentially gutted out and locked out. I know I said I was going to get to Lucid, but let me continue this point. AOC got into a bleeping match with Governor Andrew Cuomo the other day. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Marxist who is a congresswoman from Queens, is calling for a wealth tax to be put in place not only federally but in New York. Essentially, it would be an extra tax on the assets of billionaires. In other words, if you're a billionaire and you lived in New York, we're going to tax you a portion of your assets. And Andrew Cuomo, himself a Democrat, says that this is an absolutely terrible idea. He said there is nothing more mobile than wealth. Poor people aren't that mobile. But wealth is as mobile as anything could possibly be. If you've been following Sean Hannity's commentary on this, he talks about his desire to eventually not do his show from the Fox studios in New York. He also does his radio show in Manhattan because of the incredible amount of taxes that he pays as an employee in New York City. Rush Limbaugh has for years talked about the reason he moved his program to Palm Beach from New York is because he didn't want to have to pay the high income taxes. Imagine if you now slap a wealth tax on top of that. And Cuomo was saying, look, as it is, I'm trying to get the people out of the Hamptons and back into the city. The Hamptons are these communities at the end of Long Island, longtime summer vacation residences of wealthy people. But with everything shut down, they're living permanently out in there's East Hampton and Southampton and Northampton and the Hamptons. Anyway, those are outside the city limits of New York. And Cuomo's trying to get them back into the city to get some of their capital and some of their taxes back in there. Well, but that's still in New York State. Imagine what would happen if AOC got her way. And this is the part of taxation that liberals never understand. I try to make this point a lot about what lengths people will go to avoid paying taxes. If they put in place a tax on billionaires in New York where a percentage of their assets would have to be taxed either by the federal government or the state government, let's say the state government there, which is what she's demanding that Andrew Cuomo do. Many people believe that she's going to run against him. That'd be quite an interesting race in 2 years if that happens. Cuomo is saying they're all going to leave. Do you know how easy it would be, for example, for a billionaire to live in Connecticut or New Jersey or Florida than New York? If we tax their assets, they'll never reside here if for no other reason to avoid the asset tax. You're going to end up costing us a fortune because now that they're not residing here at all, we're not going to get A, any taxes from them, or B, any of their economic activity, and C, you're going to kill off high-end real estate because they're all going to be leaving. Now, somebody like AOC, a Marxist, can't understand that. It is impossible to get a liberal to understand why raising taxes of any sort never generates the revenue that they think that it is going to, because it discourages the activity. If New York says, if a billionaire lives in New York, we're going to tax their assets, billionaires simply aren't going to live in New York. It's all an aside to the Lucid story, which I promise you I actually am going to get to, and I'll do it in the next segment here. I'm also going to give you the Sizzling Summer Cash Contest text in word, the story about Lucid, the upstart automobile manufacturer that is creating buzz all over the place with its announcement that its new sedan, which is going to go on sale early next year, has a range of 500 miles and a horsepower of 1,000. And a starting price of $60,000. Now, if they can deliver all of that, it's a serious threat to Tesla. It's a serious threat to everybody else, especially if this is where the technology is going, that they can now get the range from the measly 230 miles that some of these cars have up into the 500s. If you can get the horsepower to the point that you literally have more than any human being could ever use, and you could do it at a price point that's about the same as a regular old internal combustion gasoline car, then everybody's thoughts about where the market is going in terms of electric are real. But what if it isn't just a change in the way we power the cars? What if it's also a change in terms of how we sell them? I don't want to scare all the people that work in automobile sales to death, but many of these upstarts, starting with Tesla, are wondering why in the world we would ever let a car dealer skim some of our profits. What in the world do we need dealerships for? News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. We will be discussing the results of yesterday's election, one of the things still to come on today's program. Right now, I'm going to be giving you the 4 o'clock hour word in the Sizzling Summer Cash Contest. The word for this hour is happy. Happy, happy. You have until 5 p.m. to text in happy to 200-200. You get a text confirming entry plus iHeartRadio info, standard dated message rates apply in this nationwide contest. After much ado, how long have I been plugging this Lucid story? About an hour, right? Since the beginning, it's about an hour. With a lot of these startups in the automobile industry that are moving toward electrification, no one knows how successful they're going to be. We know that the stock market believes that this is the future. It has made Tesla the most valuable automobile company in the world, even though it, at present, sells only a fraction of cars, just as Amazon was the number 2 retailer to Walmart when its sales were still only 5% of Walmart. Remember that? It was in anticipation of what was going to happen that Amazon eventually would become the biggest retailer in the world and would dwarf everyone else. And the belief is that Tesla will eventually sell way more cars than anyone else because, and this is the thinking, who's going to be dumb enough to use an internal combustion engine when all you have to do is charge the car up for a fraction of the fuel costs as one would pay by going to a gas station and this, that, and the other thing. Again, people can debate whether or not that's the way it's going to play out, but it's what people think is going to happen, and it's what investors think is going to happen, and it's why the traditional automobile companies, Ford in particular, there are people who think the company should go private. Ford is almost a penny stock. Ford sells the biggest selling vehicle in the world, and the stock price is down there in the toilet. The F-Series truck is the biggest selling vehicle in the world. There are things that are going on in financial markets that I admit I don't understand. I don't know why Ford is such an considered to be almost worthless stock when they sell these vehicles like crazy, but that's the way the market is reacting because the market foresees the future and the market thinks that there is no future for cars that are powered and gasoline, that it will all go to electric. Well, whether they're right or they're wrong, the electric cars are now coming, and a lot of these are companies that are simply not like, Nissan's got the Leaf and this one's got the other. They're just only going to make electric cars. Lucid, which was founded by some people who came from Tesla, essentially said, and this is the same thing that Tesla did. We looked at everything that Tesla did and everything that we thought that they were doing wrong, and we decided to do it different. This often happens. many competitors in a business will come from an older business and say, okay, they did 85% right, but the 15% we think they're doing wrong, we'll change it and we'll make it better. The CEO of Lucid said in particular that Elon Musk's flaw was that he is settling on range. What does that mean? Because the range of the Tesla is longer than the traditional American car companies' range for their electric vehicles that was good enough for Musk. Lucid believes that the biggest obstacle for people to switch over to an electric car is the range. What's the range? How far the car goes on a single charge. I happen to agree with that. I know that it's the biggest single obstacle that I would face. When they say, well, the car's got 220 miles of range, yeah, who's going to push it to that 218th mile? Now, I'm a guy, and I know how guys are with fuel tanks. We are not fazed by 1/16. That thing says empty, and we all know that the car is lying. Paul, I think, even once said that he kind of gets a thrill off seeing how far down he can run it on the fumes. Paul says 20 miles after the empty, but let's be honest. You're not as likely to do that with the electric charging thing because there aren't, there's always a gas station. What are you ever around here, ever more than, a mile from a gas station, but you might be farther from a charging station. And also that 220 miles or 240 is often optimum conditions. You're not flooring it. You don't have the AC on. It's, the temperature's 72 degrees. So 240 might for the average person be, I'm not going to shove it beyond 150. Well, that's a pain in the butt. Doesn't affect most people that are just commuting and going back and forth to work. But if you have to make a long drive, you go to Green Bay, it means you're going to stop for half an hour and charge and so on. You get that thing to 300, 350, 400, 450, 500. Most weeks I don't put 500 miles on the car. Well, that's not correct. No, it is correct. Yeah. So for a lot of people, 500 miles... that means you're not charging it every night. You don't have to worry about even having to have the thing in a garage. You could take it on a long trip. You could, for heaven's sakes, drive to Green Bay and back. You could, so much that you could do. So I do believe Lucid is right that the biggest obstacle to get people into electric cars is to really stretch that range out so that the cars can run a long, long time between charges. The other issues. How does the car run? Well, most people think electric cars run way better than gasoline-powered cars because they don't have a transmission and they don't have an engine. What about the other factors that are in there? How does it look? What's the build quality? Do the doors fit? Is it going to be in the shop all the time? Is there a used car market? Those are all things to be determined in the future. But this gets me now finally to the point that I was making. The big thing that Tesla decided, and Lucid is deciding, and the other one that's coming out soon, Rivian, which is developing a truck and an SUV that are months away, is they believe that the traditional car companies, the Japanese companies, the German companies, the American companies, the fatal flaw in their marketing is that they are giving away free money. Grab a car, you pick a car company. Honda. When Honda sells a car, Honda gives a commission on the car to the dealer that people buy it from. When Paul bought his car, he didn't drive to Japan and go to Honda and say, hey, I'm going to walk in and give me a car. Just as if you want to have a can of light beer, you don't drive into Miller Valley and bang on the office door and ask for a can. You go to the grocery store, right? Should I come up with more examples of this because it's funny? Now, there are some products that people do buy direct from manufacturers, and the internet world that we are in has made that easier. The reason that in the past products like this were sold through middlemen was that it was not all that easy for a manufacturer to sell a product. But now, to buy something, instead of having to go into a physical space, you can simply punch a button on the internet. Many retailers are questioning this. Right now, there are any number of products that you could, for instance, I can buy an Apple phone from Best Buy or I can buy it straight from Apple. A lot of products that are working that way. Can it work with the automobile companies? Well, Tesla, Lucid, Rivian, and all the other electric makers are saying it is idiotic to take a portion of our profits and give them to a car dealer. Why can't we just sell the cars directly? The argument against that is, yeah, but these dealers are all over the country. Paul mentioned Honda. I wonder how many Honda dealers are in southeastern Wisconsin? 6? If you'd say go between, say, Mequon and Kenosha and over to Brookfield or Oconomowoc, might even be more. I mean, there's just a zillion of them. They're all over. Lucid can't put 6 stores in southeastern Wisconsin. In fact, they can't put any. Wisconsin has a law that says manufacturers cannot sell directly to the public. You have to go through a dealer or you have to go out of state to buy the car. That's why you can't legally buy a Tesla in Wisconsin. You have to go buy it in Illinois. It only means that you're taking the order in Illinois. That it's not a direct sales store here, but most people believe that those laws are going to change. But even if they do, Lucid's not going to have 16 storefronts in southeastern Wisconsin. How many Chevy dealers are there on there? They're not going to have that. So the regular car dealers are saying, look, we get a service out of these dealers. These dealers are our salespeople. They're running all these ads in the paper. They're running all these ads on the radio station. You go in there and the car salesman, he gets his commission. He's working his tail off in order to sell the car to you. Then the people come in for the service and we don't want to mess with this. We don't want to mess with that way. You know, they're doing all the work. We'd be more than happy to give them the little cut that they get for selling a car. Plus, they give us this visibility. They're all over the place. You drive down Highway 100, which is very close to our station. Is there any car that isn't for sale on Highway 100? It's amazing. They're all there. Well, we talked earlier about that. You know, the storefronts in New York, how they become advertising for the big chains. I drive past, Wild, I think it's the biggest Toyota in Wisconsin. I drive past that thing almost every day here to work. Well, that's an advertisement. You see it. There's the Honda on the other side of the street. There's a Zuzu over here. There's this one. Then up the road, there's the Mercedes is there. The Audi is there. Maserati is there. Alfa. It's on and every kind of car that there is, you see. The companies that make the electric cars say that that's overrated. That in the future, the new generation of buyers doesn't need that. Are they right or are they wrong? Well, I'm a traditionalist. I kind of think they're wrong. I think that if Tesla had a zillion dealers all over the place, they would sell even more cars. If Tesla sold to middlemen and you could drive in southeastern Wisconsin and just stop in right now and get in a Tesla and do a test drive, I think that would help their sales. They don't really agree with that. One of the things that I noted, and you may recall that I did a segment on this a couple of years ago, Tesla mentioned that 40% of its buyers buy a vehicle without ever driving it. That blew me away. I can't imagine buying a car that I didn't test drive, that I didn't see how I fit, that I didn't see how the dash looked, what the feel is like, what the steering is like. I just can't imagine doing it. And especially an electric car in which they say the experience is so different, such a different kind of, I just can't imagine not wanting to drive at least 15 or 20 miles in the car before doing it. It'd be like buying a house that you'd never been in and just say, I'm going to live in the thing. But many younger buyers don't feel that need to do it. So Lucid says we're not going to have any dealerships. We're simply going to sell the cars over the internet. What we will have is the same thing Tesla has. We will have a few storefronts that will be out there for somebody who wants to go in and see a car and drive it to do so. But they won't be sales centers. They won't be commissioned salespeople. And we will not have a network of independent dealers that are out there. They also believe that this will dramatically reduce their advertising costs by not having to do the cost sharing that they do with that the regular car dealers do. You know, if you see a Ford dealer running an ad, often Ford pays a portion of the ad. They all think that that's an archaic model and not necessary. So, to wind all of this up, that started with the changes in retailing that are occurring because of COVID-19, one wonders how many of the things that we buy in person right now, we won't be in 10 years. Grocery is changing. Restaurant is changing. Clothing is changing. Everything you do from Amazon is changing. Is automobile the next thing? And if that's the case, what's going to happen with all this commercial property that we have out there right now? What will happen to Manhattan? What will happen to downtown Chicago? And for that matter, what will happen to Highway 100 if everybody's buying electric cars and nobody's actually going into a dealership to pick them up? I don't have answers to any of those questions, but it is an interesting thing to think about. Could you buy a car without test driving it? If you're going to buy an electric car, wouldn't you really have to get comfortable with it by driving it before you could do it? If the only way you could buy a Lucid is to buy it through the internet and the nearest sales center was 85 miles away in the state of Illinois, would you feel comfortable doing that? If in order to get the vehicle serviced, Lucid would have to pick it up and drag it down to Illinois, would you feel comfortable with that? Now, they all say that automobile service is a thing of the past, too. And Tesla points out almost every repair Tesla does is done online. That they just send a message to the computer brain because the Tesla doesn't really have. Remember, there's no engine in there. It just has a motor. Everything else is just the computer brain that's real. You're right. I mean, what about the axle? I mean, what about, what if you dent the door? Somebody smashes what about the sensor on the front of the car that tells you that you're too far away? I mean, they got to do some of those things. You and I are dinosaurs, though. We just feel more comfortable. I know where my dealer is, and I know I can drive the thing in and say, okay, here it is, and now charge me an arm and a leg and fix the thing. The electric companies believe that model is archaic. And I suspect many of us would have laughed when we thought that Amazon sales would dwarf those of Macy's, as they do now. Amazon, on the other hand, does not have to worry about looters going to downtown Chicago and gutting out their store. These are all the new realities that are in place, especially given the reality that we now have of big cities being run by Democrat mayors that are allowing their cities to literally die right in front of them. Standing up for Milwaukee, this is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show on News Talk 1130 WYSN. This area of ordinary citizens facing ruin for holding viewpoints that are not deemed to be politically correct has been an ongoing theme on my program. It started when some people started to say in response to Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, which many people believe is a racist statement, and whether it is or it isn't, it gets you fired if you say it. It has now moved just in a few short weeks far beyond that, to the point that anyone who criticizes Black Lives Matter or its goals gets canceled themselves. I have granted the point that there's, I won't say confusion. When some people say Black Lives Matter, they're referring to those three words, Black Lives Matter. In the same way that you could say my dog's life matters, or the Milwaukee Brewers matter, or white lives matter. They say that Black Lives Matter, which is a non-arguable statement. Obviously, Black Lives Matter. Other people reference Black Lives Matter, and they are referring to an organization called Black Lives Matter. There is an organization called Black Lives Matter. It's been around for several years. And it is an organization that has stated goals and stated political beliefs. It is an organization that is dedicated to fighting police violence against African Americans. And its viewpoints seem to be strongly Marxist, or at the very least have Marxist tendencies. The organizer of Black Lives Matter in Chicago yesterday defended the looting that occurred in downtown Chicago Saturday night and Sunday morning, calling it reparations and saying, look, all these stores have insurance. There's no big deal. So when some people disagree with Black Lives Matter, they are saying, I disagree with that. And I believe that an organization that has those beliefs is wacky and dangerous. They have to go to great pains to make it clear that they're not saying that they don't believe Black Lives Matter, that they are disagreeing with the group Black Lives Matter. Now, some people would argue that all of this is beside the point. Why shouldn't you be able to disagree with Black Lives Matter without regard to whether or not you're talking about the group or the statement or anything else? Aren't we Americans, and don't we have the right to have certain points of view? Well, we've never had absolute rights to have certain points of view. Overtly racist people, there's never been an obligation that anybody has to keep on the payroll somebody that is an overtly racist individual. But our tradition has been that we accept a broad variety of points of view and defend people's rights to hold them. This has dramatically narrowed during the cancel culture of the last few years and has gotten far worse over the last several months. As anti-police protests have devolved into riots and anarchy in many American cities, from Portland to Seattle to on Saturday night, Wauwatosa, there's been more criticism from more people of Black Lives Matter. Whether or not one agrees with Black Lives Matter or not is one question. Whether or not we should be getting rid of people who hold an anti-Black Lives Matter viewpoint just because that's their belief is something else altogether. Here's what happens in government and especially in education. Extremist liberal viewpoints are presented all the time. But extremist conservative viewpoints not only are never expressed, you're barely able to go even somewhat right of center. There is no sanction or slap down or crack down on the other side. Now, one of the points that I've been making over the last number of years is the kind of garbage that's been coming out of so many of the public schools, where teachers have been standing in front of the classroom, ideologizing and spewing out political crap, with parents and others not really aware of what's going on and school board members looking the other way, as some of these unprofessional jerks use their position as teachers to try to force kids to think a certain way. Not all teachers do this, but many have. When you wonder how, you could have an entire generation of people in their 20s supporting socialism when socialism is the most discredited form of economics in the history of man. It's because they were educated by teachers who told them the opposite and didn't tell them what was going on in our history with socialism. One of many examples. This brings us to several stories that I'm going to tie together in several different segments. I'm going to share some information that I've received from a listener, and it is the subject of an open records request that I am making. As you know, many employers, including many government employers, are sending all the workers off to re-education camps these days. Diversity training, telling people how they're supposed to think. Depending on the content, that's either fine or it's not fine. But what often happens is the content, especially when it's a government employer, becomes extreme in and of itself. The following employee, who out of frustration contacted me about, and I've been hearing about what's been going on at Waukesha County Technical College in terms of the lecturing and hectoring that employees are forced to sit through for some time. This employee is so terrified that the people who run the college are going to find out who he or she is, that they are begging me to do nothing to identify them in sharing the story. First of all, that tells you how bad the environment is. And it tells you that the witch hunting that we now see going on in Germantown, ever since they brought in the superintendent from west of Madison, is common in public education. The fact that somebody who works at WCTC is terrified that he or she could get in trouble for simply telling me what's going on at the school, that's chilling right on its face. So I'm going to share here the information passed along by a listener, and I can tell you that I am tempting, via an open records request, to try to get my hands on materials that a presenter that WCTC has hired apparently doesn't want anybody to find out about. And that's the thing. When they put on these sessions, the diversity training stuff and so on, they don't want the outside world to see this stuff because the outside world might be shocked what passes for some of this stuff. That it isn't just let's all peacefully get along. It's, what's really wrong with this world? God. which is the sort of stuff that happens in some of these things, which is why they don't like recordings and they don't like to hand out material. So I'm going to share this and take out, at the request of the letter writer, I never reveal anybody's name anyway, I'm going to take out all sorts of identifying details so you can't even get anywhere close to what this person does. Mark, I'm writing because I blank, and then mentions their position at Waukesha County Technical College, and we have in-service meetings this week. I have hesitated about bringing your attention to one of our meetings because I am fearful of any information about me being available in public. Therefore, please do not mention my name, department, or even my gender if you discuss this on air. Well, of course I won't. That's somebody who's fearful. Before we go any farther, what does that tell you about the kind of environment that WCTC, which is located in a conservative area, has in place when someone who works there is terrified of being identified for simply letting me pass along to the public what's going on at that college? Fortunately, we do still have laws, and there is an open records law, and I'm going to try to get my hands on paperwork to indicate exactly what's going on inside WCTC and exactly why people would be so terrified of retaliation for letting me know about it. Anyway, the person continues. This week's virtual Zoom meeting is led by Jane Elliott. She's a famous social commentator, famous for her blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise regarding diversity, race, and inclusion. I and many others are required to spend over 2 hours of our time to watch the Zoom meeting. Apparently, the meeting was not recorded at the request of Jane herself. Now, that's fascinating. It's a Zoom meeting. Now, what's Zoom? Zoom is it's video. It's like, you watch a thing on the internet. Everybody sits in their own place, and the one person's over here and the other person is over there. You would think normally if you have a meeting on Zoom, you would record it so that the people who couldn't attend at the time, say it's held at 8:30 in the morning, the people could see it at 11:15. When we do our trading here, we just watch a recorded thing. Paul watches it at one time. I watch it at another. But according to this person, Jade Elliott specifically demanded that this only be viewed live and that there be no recording made of it. Personally, I think this already raises questions. In the presentation, she touched on many areas, including that God should not be in the Pledge of Allegiance, how evangelism influenced society negatively. She recommended the books C Street and The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power. And she even touched on Donald Trump apparently reading the writings of Adolf Hitler and keeping the books in a locked drawer when he was younger. The person then included a transcript. It was such a disgrace to have to sit through this garbage, all on the taxpayer dollar. The college has jumped on the bandwagon, and it's not about not being racist at all, as you know. As mentioned, the meeting was not recorded. And within Zoom, it would not allow me to even copy the full transcript. I could search for words, and I was able to copy a screenshot of the part about Trump and Hitler. And the person sends to me, and for people who want me to post this online for reasons that are obvious, including doing anything to identify this person, I'm not going to do it. And the screenshot is then posted, and I can read it. Anyway, the email continues. The communication from the college regarding the announcement of the in-service for faculty is here for your reference. Welcome to the August 2020 College in-service. This year's topic, where do we go from here? From chaos to community, promises to be a thought-provoking and remarkable experience as we deepen our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion at WCTC. WCTC welcomes Jane Elliott to the August College in-service virtual event. Ms. Elliott is an internationally known teacher, lecturer, and diversity trainer and recipient of the National Mental Health Association Award for Excellence in Education. Her mission, one race. For more information, visit her thing, so forth and so on. So that's the first component of this. I filed an open records request of WCTC for any recording that WCTC may have made of this event, and for the copy of the contract and any stipulations that Jane Elliott would have made about not wanting to have her comments recorded at all. That is quite fascinating when somebody is putting on a seminar for government employees and they do not want a record of what it is that they said. Why would that be? And why in the world is WCTC allowing it unless the explanation is that Jane Elliott is putting out very, very controversial leftist thought, and WCTC doesn't want anybody to know exactly how far out on the extreme it is. But that's the point, and that's what we're going to go in the next segment. You say something that somebody deems to be extreme on the right, well, they're going to fire you. You say something that's deemed extreme on the left, we not only are going to require everybody to sit there and listen to it, we're going to make sure there's no recordings or evidence so that nobody can prove you even did it. This leads me to the second part of this segment, and I want you to think along with me on this. There is, for the liberals, a downside of so many of the schools going virtual this fall. Well, there's a lot of downsides, but there's one from the perspective of these lefties who run the schools. Can you think of what it is? Paul's answer. Paul, should I give your answer? No. Everything is, well, actually, as you know, I always have greater confidence in you figuring these things out. It just takes you like 5 extra seconds. In the past, I'll help you out of this. Let's imagine I'm a lefty teacher. And your daughter's back in the 5th grade. Imagine the number of times I would have had to call you in for a parent-teacher conference. Anyway, I'm a lefty teacher. Your daughter's in the 5th grade. How do you find out the lefty crap that I teach in the class? Maybe from your daughter, if she would volunteer it. And then if she volunteers it, you're getting it kind of secondhand. You weren't there, right? I don't know, maybe you did it, but when you were a kid, did you ever go, when you're a parent, did you ever go sit in any of the classes that the teachers taught? Did you ever do it unannounced? Where they didn't know you were coming? They don't let you. Okay. So this is where I'm going with this. I'll ask the question again. What is one of the downsides for many of these lefty teachers of the schools going mostly virtual? No, I said the downside for the lefty teachers of the schools going virtual. For them, now the parents can see it. The thing is, on Zoom, mom can be standing right behind Junior when Junior's watching the lesson on Zoom. If mom's home. Well, if Junior's in the 4th grade, probably mom is home. This is starting to freak out teachers. Wait a minute. These parents are going to know what we're teaching. Now, for many of you, there may be a sense of naivete. I think it's starting to go away about how bad some of the hackery is from some of these left-wingers that get out there and spew this crap in the schools. I think the Germantown experience, facilitated by a school board that is perfectly fine with making sure that they ideologically sanitize the school district so that everybody is a good, proper, enlightened lefty, might get rid of some of that naivete. But when we pick up, we're going to talk about how some lefty teachers themselves are freaking out about the notion of, with virtual learning, many of the parents, and for that matter, others, are going to learn exactly just what it is that they are teaching in their now virtual classes.
Sign of the times.
What a waste of a summer we've had. We've never had better weather than this summer and never had less to do. Go up north, go fishing, that's it, right? Do you have a third? Golf. Yeah, I came up with the three. Swim. Get in there with all the COVID people. I just love that. People wear masks everywhere, and then they get into the same water with people who have the virus. Or you have to have your own pool. This is again another suburbanite talking. I don't know. I don't understand any of those things. Things I have to put up with. All right, here's the weather forecast. Just spectacular weather again for tonight. Mostly clear, bottoming out in the mid to upper 60s, 63 for a low. Tomorrow, very similar to today. Mostly sunny, upper 70s near the lake, low to mid 80s inland. Ditto for Friday. Mostly sunny, about 80 near the lake, mid 80s inland. Saturday, partly sunny, slight chance of showers and thunderstorms, 82 for a high, 81 for Sunday. Much cooler for next week with temperatures in the low to mid 70s for highs at the beginning of the week. Matt Walsh writes about this on the website, thedailywire.com. He found an interesting exchange on Twitter involving a number of teachers who were commenting on, and remember, it's the teachers that are pushing for all virtual public schools. Some of them are commenting on the downsides associated of the lessons being available for the public and all to see, not just parents. Like, how about mom and dad recording the lesson and showing it to troublemaking reporters and talk show hosts and everybody else? And school board members. Paul mentions occasionally parents will sit in on a class, and my guess is that the teacher is going to be on the best behavior when mom and dad is there. The thread, which quoted Matthew Kay, who's a well-known educator and author, has since been made private. But it's quoted here in Matt Walsh's piece. He writes, so this fall, virtual class discussions will have many potential spectators, parents, siblings, etc., in the same room. We'll never be quite sure who is overhearing the discourse. What does this do for our equity and inclusion work? You know what that is. The equity and inclusion work is when they bash America, this, that, and the other thing. In other words, he's fretting. People are going to find out exactly what they're teaching. While conversation about race are in my wheelhouse and remain a concern in this no walls environment, I am most intrigued by the damage that helicopter snowplow parents, I've never heard that one, snowplow. I know what the helicopter parent is. Do you know what the snowplow parent is? Well, let's figure it out. Then you'll have people call up and tell you and we won't want to hear it. Let's figure it out. Well, we know what the helicopter parent is. That's the one that hovers over the kid everywhere they go and micromanages everything. What would the snowplow parent be? Just push right through, like, I don't know, like telling the teacher this is what you're supposed to teach my kid and everything? You know, anyway, the helicopter snowplow parents can do in the host conversations about gender and sexuality. So, already he's fretting. You know, the gender sexuality stuff in which they start telling the kids that you can identify any way you want. He doesn't like the fact that the parents might actually now be listening to this. And then, and while conservative parents are my chief concern, coming right out admitting it, I know the damage that can come from the left too. If we are engaged in the messy work of destabilizing a kid's racism, or homophobia, or transphobia, how much do we want their classmates' parents piling on? Walsh then writes, it's important to note that while some teachers responded to Kay's comments with the appropriate level of horror and disgust, many others chimed in to share their own strategies for brainwashing during the pandemic. One teacher said she'd also been thinking about the problem Kay described that had decided that she'd ask students about their preferred pronouns via survey. Though she's still worried that caregivers might see it and learn something about their children they weren't supposed to know. In other words, the teacher's supposed to know it, but the parents aren't. Another teacher said that students last semester would sometimes type secrets into the chat whenever the discussion turned to anti-racism and gender-inclusive content. Another complained that a white parent, she made sure to specify white, in her district recorded a Zoom class and filed a complaint against the teacher for an anti-racist read aloud, saying the teacher's commentary was inappropriate and biased. This, the teacher said, is going to be an issue. A ninth grade teacher shared in the commiseration, saying that her class required students to read and respond to a news article, but that participation in this exercise is stunted because now outsiders are listening. The outsiders, to be clear, are the children's parents. A teacher with pronouns listed in her Twitter handle said that she plans to use the chat function more than voice lectures because she wanted children to share information with her in a parentless way. A science teacher agreed with all of the sentiments expressed here and summarized it bluntly. Parents are dangerous. Now the story goes on. And the point of this piece is the fretting that is occurring from many liberal teachers who realize that really for the first time, the parents are going to have an unfettered look at what's actually going on in teaching and how some teachers are strategizing and doing their best to still keep the stuff that they're spewing out of parental eyes. I've commented that I think many of us were not aware, and I think many parents were not aware of just how bad the ideologizing has been in the classroom, particularly on these social issues and gender issues and so on, over the last several years, and we now know why. We now know the lengths the teachers have gone to try to stop the parents from knowing what the kids are actually being given in the class. So if you're looking for an upside in so many of these schools deciding to remain virtual, and you might be able to make the same comment about colleges, although fewer parents probably are going to watch a college online instruction than, say, a third or a fourth grader sitting at home when one of the parents is sitting at home. We will have a better opportunity to keep tabs on the material that is being presented. So some of the stuff that we have only heard secondhand to the kids that is being said, we might have greater evidence of it. Finally, this brings us to the situation that I've been talking about this week in Germantown, where a swimming coach assistant girls swimming coach at the high school in Germantown, contacted me to say that he was non-renewed by the athletic director after they found out that on social media he has been critical of Black Lives Matter. He points out he's a very opinionated person. He's not going to back down from his points of view to anyone. He said he doesn't agree with Black Lives Matter. He thinks it's a bad organization and so on. And when somebody drew this to the attention of the athletic director, she told him that he can't coach there anymore and that he's on the wrong side of history. It should be stressed that he's not a teacher. He's simply an employee who was he has an outside job, but he was working as an assistant swimming coach. And he said it's terrible that simply for not supporting Black Lives Matter, which about 40% of Americans, according to the latest Marquette University Law School poll, don't support, that simply for not supporting Black Lives Matter, he can lose his teaching job. And I've been offering some inquiries or asking some questions of Germantown, which has a new leadership team in place this year. There's a new school superintendent. He comes from the Madison area, from Barneveld. Their athletic director came in 2 years ago. As to whether or not there is now an ideological litmus test where people who don't object to a movement that has led riots and has espoused blatant anti-police beliefs, that if you dare criticize that movement, you can't even teach. And I'm not suggesting that you have to disagree with Black Lives Matter. We're now at a point, apparently, where if you have a viewpoint that about 40% of Wisconsinites hold, you can't teach in Germantown. The school district initially responded to me by not responding. Then they've been telling a number of residents, well, it's a personnel matter, so we can't really talk about it. But in an interesting little exchange, some of the information that's being out there and that's out there in the media is not true. The superintendent of schools, Brett Stousland, sent an email to a resident of Germantown today, which that resident sent to me, saying, quote, "As you know, I am not at liberty to talk about personnel matters. However, I will tell you that what is floating around the media is not all the facts." Well, I contacted Brett Stousland, the superintendent up there in Germantown, brand new on the job, and said, to my knowledge, I'm the only person in the media that's commenting on this. What have I reported that is not factual? I printed verbatim the allegation that is made by the teacher. I pointed out that I have contacted you and the activities director and copied this to all members of the school board in an attempt to get a response. I asked him, am I not correct that you're a brand new superintendent who came in from west of Madison? Am I not correct that the activities director came in from Franklin? Am I not correct that the teacher had his contract not renewed? Am I not correct that the activities director said you're on the wrong side? We want to be on the right side of history. The thing that has made the story that we've shared on Germantown noteworthy is that it's Germantown. Germantown is just north of Menomonee Falls. And Menomonee Falls is another school district in which the residents are rather conservative, but the school administration over the years has been very liberal and the school board is extremely liberal. I've not ever really heard that about Germantown. They did push a tax increase a few years ago, but otherwise I've always heard that it's a pretty good school district and run rather well. But over the last several months, we've seen a number of our institutions simply be hijacked away from us. If somebody is, in the scheme of things, unimportant to the kids as an assistant swimming coach, he's not a teacher who's there day to day, just a swimming coach. If they are willing to go to the lengths to get rid of him for not buying into the Black Lives Matter agenda, which many consider to be radical and dangerous, what's the standard for the rest of the employees and how high of a standard are they being held to? This is profoundly un-American. As I say, you don't get a pass to say and believe anything in public and still keep a public job. We have always had limits. But those limits have in the past been very, very broad. You can be the most whacked out, wigged out liberal and most people, okay, fine. You're a whacked out, wigged out liberal, but part of being an American is you get a right to be a whacked out, wigged out liberal. And you can be an extreme conservative, well to the right of Mark Belling and even Paul. Do you think you're more to the right than me? John Wyatt doesn't work here. He pretty much won the award as the most conservative on the show. He was to the right of me. Yeah, I mean, he was on some things way to the right. I mean, he was just, well, do you think you're farther to the right than me or not? I just think you live in Cedarburg, that's some of they've got a streak of leftyism in there that's wearing off on you, don't you think? Paul says nothing's wearing off on him. Paul says he just fights it off. It bounces right off of him. The point that I make is there are people who have views that are to the right of mine, and frankly, some might be just unacceptable. But our country has allowed that. It's when you bring your views into the workplace itself that it becomes problematic. This has changed. All over America, anyone who offers a comment, not on the job, but simply on social media or to a friend or a sign in front of their yard, that is at all right of center is getting purged, canceled, wiped out. And it's especially scary that this is now happening in Germantown. Whether or not the guy's position that Black Lives Matter is a no-good organization is correct or not, it shouldn't affect his ability to coach swimming, just as if a teacher is a staunch supporter of Black Lives Matter and doesn't much like the cops, it shouldn't affect that teacher's ability to teach either, so long as he or she keeps their yap shut in front of the kids, which, when it comes to speaking from the left, they never do. Now, I did get a response, finally, from the president of the school board up there today. His name is Bob Soderberg. Well, you're just an entertainer is one of the highlights that he gave, but he said that he's just an entertainer. That's how they like to insult me. Well, I know you're just an entertainer. Suffice to say that he's all in on making sure that up there in Germantown, anybody that's not all on board with the BLM movement, they're going to do their best to take to the gallows and turn it into a nice lefty little thing. And if I don't like it, I can go jump in a lake. Now, that's an exaggeration. And in fairness to Bob Soderberg, I will read his entire email verbatim on the air. It's Mark 1130 WYSN. Mark Belling, late afternoon show. Chance to win $1,000 sizzling summer cash contest. Text in word for the 5 o'clock hour is check. 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 Text that into 200 anytime between now and 6 o'clock. You get a text confirming entry plus iHeartRadio info. Standard dated message rates apply in this nationwide contest. As I mentioned, they got rid of an assistant swimming coach in Germantown because he's been posting social media comments critical of Black Lives Matter. Now, as you know, there is an organization called Black Lives Matter, and then there's simply the sentence, Black Lives Matter. Then there are people who say they support Black Lives Matter, and I think probably don't know whether or not they're endorsing the organization or the words. It's all over the map. But the athletic director took offense at some of the posts that the assistant swim coach made and made it clear that it was because of those posts that he was not going to come back and be a swimming coach at the school. This is the sort of thing that is going on all over the United States, that people are saying things that some people have decided are not allowed to be said anymore. And it is deeply frustrating many Americans who believe that their right to hold the opinions of their choice are being taken from them. I have gotten a response to the president of the school board up there, Robert Soderberg, who responds to me as follows. And it's long, but in fairness to him, I'll read the whole thing. And he makes some allegations that the coach, Tim D'Amico, is not fully explaining what it was that he posted on social media. You will note, however, that at no point does he deny that he's being fired because of his beliefs. Mr. Belling, I feel compelled to respond to recent comments that have been made about a former assistant swim coach for the Germantown School District, Mr. Tim D'Amico, in the media and on social media, and by media personalities such as you. I should note that our district is extremely careful not to make public comments concerning personnel matters for any number of good reasons. However, in these circumstances, it is important to respond to the rash of inaccurate and at times reckless commentary that this situation has generated. I think that might be a reference to me. You think that's who he's talking about there? I don't know. Mr. D'Amico has not told the truth, and certainly not the whole truth about this situation. A letter from Mr. D'Amico appeared on your website. In fact, I have posted on Belling.com D'Amico's charges, and I pointed out that I would have presented Germantown's side if they had presented their side. The letter offered Mr. D'Amico's story about what he claimed happened to him. That story is not accurate. First, Mr. D'Amico describes his own Facebook posting as though he makes fine, careful distinctions between the statement that Black Lives Matter, which he claimed to support, and comparing the KKK to the Black BLM organization, contending that, quote, of course, I agree with the statement, but the political organization is not something that I as a conservative can or will ever support. Mr. D'Amico's suggestion that his posting makes these careful, clear distinctions so that readers understand that he supports the message but not the organization is ridiculous. Instead, the posting shockingly states, hashtag BLM is a cult and no different than the hashtag KKK. They both think their race is superior. Consequently, Mr. D'Amico's message is Consequently, Mr. D'Amico's message reasonably could be and was understood by readers to equating a considerable number of our student athletes with the white knights of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, I'm going to interject, even though I wanted to read the letter differently. The fact that in his post he said hashtag Black Lives Matter, to me indicates he's referring to the group and not to people who simply believe Black Lives Matter. He put hashtag Black Lives Matter and then hashtag Ku Klux Klan. So to me, it's rather clear that he's saying that the beliefs in racial superiority of Black Lives Matter and the Ku Klux Klan are similar references to the individual groups. Obviously, Soderbergh doesn't believe that's clear, but I think that putting the hashtag there does seem to indicate you're referring to the group, the organization, rather than just black people in general. He continues, I realize that your program is entertainment, not journalism. Well, my show is not journalism. Journalism occurs during my program, but this is not a journalistic endeavor. I do not attempt to be unbiased. Nevertheless, I am tremendously disappointed that you do not appear to even look at the particular posting and certainly did not post it yourself. Doing so would have allowed your audience to decide for itself whether Mr. D'Amico's description was accurate. Moreover, by focusing only on this particular posting, Mr. D'Amico is clearly trying to imply that this was in fact the only thing that he posted. This is completely untrue. Mr. D'Amico also posted a statement that Black Lives Matter is a joke. Again, there's nothing here distinguishing between supporting the statement, which Mr. D'Amico claims to support, and the organization which Mr. D'Amico opposes. So once again, Mr. D'Amico gives the reader no reason to believe that he is making any such distinction. I will interject here. Well, I don't know if it's his obligation to explain he's referring to the organization. The organization took the name Black Lives Matter. Now, as I've said from the beginning, I think many people confuse Black Lives Matter, an extremist organization, with people who simply believe in the statement of Black Lives Matter. But it is the obligation of anybody who criticizes the organization each time they do so to explain they're talking about an organization. If so, I don't think that that's normally what people do when they criticize any organization that might also have a separate reference that might be a more generic description of people. Back to the email. Mr. D'Amico also knows full well that his superior's decision not to recommend a new contract for him for the school year does not have anything to do with his political views or his right to express these views. Mr. D'Amico's political views are his own and had nothing to do with the district's decision not to offer him a contract. Instead, the district's activities director, Ms. Sarah Unodal, chose not to recommend that a new contract be offered to Mr. D'Amico for a variety of legitimate reasons. For example, Mr. D'Amico failed to follow established protocol and used reckless professional judgment in his use of social media. Mr. D'Amico's indiscretion, lack of sound professional judgment, and total disregard for the fact that coaches have to have credibility with student athletes, fellow coaches, and parents to function effectively are among the real reasons why he was no longer a viable choice for a coaching position. Mr. D'Amico created a situation where having him return as coach clearly would have disrupted the entire swimming program, including precipitating almost certain conflict between him and student athletes, loss of credibility with student athletes, as well as serious damage to the program's ability to attract students to come out for the sport. Mr. D'Amico's recent conduct only serves to confirm this. Mr. D'Amico's contract for 2019 and 20 was not issued by the board, as all coaching contracts are. When his supervisor informed him that she would not be recommending a contract for him for this year, Mr. D'Amico knew, or should have known, that he had the option of asking that he be given an opportunity to be heard on this decision, e.g. to ask that he have a chance to address the superintendent or board of education about it. He never made any such request. However, instead, his decision was to try to destroy the good name and reputation of our district by waging a public attack on the district through the media. His bomb-throwing, defamatory campaign against the district, well, I think that might be, he's saying the guy's over the top with his use of language. This guy's now referring to him as a bomb thrower. He quarrels that D'Amico doesn't make it clear that he's referring to Black Lives Matter, the organization, rather than people who believe it. Yet the guy makes his own rhetorical leap by referencing the words that Mr. D'Amico has written as a bomb throwing. I'll just point out again that people who hold people to some standards tend not to hold themselves to the same standards. His bomb-throwing, defamatory campaign against our district is still another example of extremely poor professional judgment for someone who must have the maturity, discretion, and judgment to help manage a large high school team. Mr. D'Amico was totally misrepresented what Ms. Unerdel said in her conversation with him. I want to be absolutely clear about this. His account of her statements about history and suggestions that no one ever identified any performance concern with him is not accurate. Ms. Unerdel has been highly professional and responsible throughout this process, and she has our district's full and complete support. I have to say that I am very disappointed in the coverage of this matter and candidly in some of our own citizens' reaction to these reports. Too many people have taken Mr. D'Amico's story of your reports about him at face value. I feel that our district should have been given the benefit of the doubt. Oh. The day that Mark Belling gives a school district the benefit of the doubt is the day that he has been lobotomized. Back to the piece. Our district also should have been given a reasonable opportunity to explain the situation. That's a load of crap. As I mentioned, I contacted them on Monday. I received this from the school board president at 2:53 this afternoon, this Wednesday. This is the only response that has been given, despite the fact that I sent every member of the school board on Monday, and the activities director, Sarah Unerdl, on Monday, and the principal of the school on Monday, and the superintendent of the school on Monday, a series of questions about this that they chose not to respond, instead hiding behind this thing that it's a personnel matter and we can't talk. Anyway, our district should have been given a reasonable opportunity to explain the situation to the extent which we are allowed by the law, and because this is a personal matter with appropriate discretion. If a person's making an allegation against government can respond to it any way they want, and I'm going to decide whether or not it's newsworthy or not. Too many seem to be unable or unwilling to understand that any employer, public or private, has to be careful not to discuss personnel matters publicly, and when an exception is made, to comment only with the utmost discretion. Our district also has a responsibility to its constituents not to comment on legal issues in any way that might provoke legal action or impact or impair our district's ability to present its own defense if legal action has already been taken. It is a shame that so many of our constituents seem to be ignoring those basic facts in their rush to judgment. In closing, I hope that this message will reassure our constituents. The message may stretch the limits on our district's customary refusal to comment on personnel matters, and for this reason, I may be unable to say more on this subject. Nevertheless, I wanted to share what I felt I could and what I believe was necessary to balance the record in this situation. Signed by Bob Soderberg, the president of the Germantown School Board. Now, without going into all of this and discussing this issue ad nauseum, which we may have already crossed the line on, I will merely point out that during my 30 years of doing this program, I have shared so many comments that have been made by teachers from the left that are so much farther to the left and so much more over the top than anything that Tim D'Amico said in his post. And we are always told that teachers have the right to their personal opinions, they have the right to express themselves, and so on. The number of comments that have been made, vile in nature, the number of vulgar signs that have been held, the number of teachers who during the Act 10 protests lied and claimed doctors' excuses that didn't exist, the number of teachers that have held up signs with vulgar words, the number of teachers who in the classroom while doing their job have made all sorts of comments trashing important political figures like our president. None of those teachers have ever been sanctioned whatsoever. I'm not going to defend everything that D'Amico had to say, and I don't endorse anybody's points of view other than my own. And whether or not he goes too far in his criticism of Black Lives Matter or not is open to interpretation. My point is that A, he has a right to his viewpoints, and B, this purging, slashing, firing never occurs to people who go too far on the left. How many people, teachers, do you think have been marching in some of these protests saying, F the police and worse? How many of them are fearful of getting fired for saying that? I would suggest that saying bleep the police, and you know which word I mean, and worse, to a police officer's face is at least as bad as any criticism that someone would offer of Black Lives Matter. This type of sanctioning only comes from the one direction. I believe that if we are going to have a discussion on police matters in our society, we cannot give an organization like Black Lives Matter, or for that matter, an organization on my side, the NRA, a police union, nobody gets a pass. You say something, you have a right to be criticized. That's America. What is happening right now in our schools is A, they're putting in place all these programs to indoctrinate you to think in an enlightened fashion, a diverse fashion, think this about gender, sexuality, race, and so on. But anybody who dares to offer a dissent is considered a hater and has to be smacked down and sanctioned. And it is sad that that happens in Germantown. And it is sad that you have a school board that is so willing to accept administrators and athletic directors who are out there engaging in cancel culture rather than inviting, in a rather conservative community themselves, people to express their points of view. Now, I will make one asterisk to my comment. I don't think it would be appropriate for D'Amico during his swim coaching time to be criticizing Black Lives Matter and carrying on about his Donald Trump or anything else. But I don't think he did that. He did this on Facebook. Just as I have criticized forever teachers who shoot off their political opinions in front of classes or in front of their teams or their extracurricular groups and so on. Those are never sanctioned. So that's my say on this, and there's that. Do you have anything you want to offer on this? You generally have something to offer. Okay. I thought John Wyatt had retired. Paul says, I agree with you. Apparently you have nothing to actually add. Well, I don't know. That it is, you are right. This would be like Abraham Lincoln delivers the Gettysburg Address and then, Brian Williams comes on to do his analysis. That's exactly what they would have done. Well, Lincoln was Republican here. 532 News Talk 1130 SN. Standing up from Milwaukee, this is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show. On News Talk 1130 WISN. Video has surfaced of Joe Biden reading from his Wilmington cave. He did, in fairness to Biden, he and Kamala Harris did make their first public appearance today in Wilmington. But yesterday, when Biden was making his announcement, they found video in which the staff literally wrote out a script for him and then put in front of him pictures of Kamala Harris so that he would know who it was that he was talking about and what he was naming her to. Did you see this? They literally wrote out, and then they have pictures that they posted her so he wouldn't get mixed up as to who it was that he was naming to be his vice president. Now, I admit I bring in notes, but so if you weren't standing there, would I get mixed up and somehow think Dave Michaels was right? Well, yeah, actually, I probably would. I can kind of relate to Joe Biden and his troubles in there. Right, all right, let's move through. We had an election yesterday, primary election. The one thing that I've been telling you for years about primary elections is the people who tend to vote in primaries, this is a generalization. And again, when I make generalizations, people think I'm saying always. I said 10. That means more often than not. The people who tend to vote in primaries are the more informed voter. The casual voter who only votes, that's who shows up in a presidential election where we get a very, very high voter turnout. For instance, Paul voted in the primary election. I don't remember if he had anything else on his ballot other than the state assembly race that was there, but he was informed on that race. He was informed by hearing my show, and he was informed by being in his community where he said that election's been the buzz up there for some time, correct? That's a more informed voter than the person who just shows up and looks for the familiar name. Also, primary elections tend to have bad way of saying it, tend to have less races. For instance, where I live in Milwaukee, there was only one contested race on my entire ballot. Uninformed voters often get tripped up when, say, a general election, there's 20 races on the ballot. They might not know who's running for county treasurer. They might not know maybe who their state assemblyman is, or maybe they don't know a lot about their sheriff, but they know who the governor, the lieutenant governor. State of Wisconsin, often people don't know who the state treasurer candidates are. You get the point. But in a primary election, there tend to be fewer elections, and it tends to be a much more informed electorate. Also, I believe in primary elections, the people who participate on the Democratic side tend to be more liberal, and the people who participate on the Republican side tend to be more conservative. The more active voter in both parties tends to be on the more extreme of the party. For that reason, conservatives often have an edge in a Republican primary, just as liberals may have an edge in a Democratic primary. That being said, there are some races that I want to comment on here in the next couple of segments. First of all, I think the highest profile race that we had in southeastern Wisconsin is the election for Congress to succeed Jim Sensenbrenner, and not surprisingly. There's only 8 congressional districts in the state. It takes up a big chunk of our listening area. It's big Republican country. And It's our first chance to elect a congressman other than Sensenbrenner. How long has Sensenbrenner been there? I believe Sensenbrenner held the Bible when John Adams was sworn in as president. I think Sensenbrenner has a sense of humor, but he actually prides himself on his longevity, don't you think? Yeah. There will be a general election in November, and the district is not a slam dunk for Republicans. It is a staunchly Republican district, but one that you can't take for granted. Tom Paulsowitz is the Democrat. He's running with a fair amount of backing behind him and so on. But the winner of the Republican primary very likely is going to win the seat in November. And there was this election between one of the better-known Republicans in the state of Wisconsin, Scott Fitzgerald, the longtime state Senate Republican leader. And he was opposed by a guy named Cliff DeTemple, who's a business owner from the northern part of the Lake Country. I indicated in my commentary on this, I wasn't going to give a suggestion one way or another on who to vote for because I thought both candidates were worthy. However, as I kind of made clear yesterday, everybody knew that Fitzgerald was going to win. His name recognition dwarfs DeTemple's. Furthermore, most Republican voters, I didn't say Democrats, but most Republican voters think generally positively of Fitzgerald through the long, he's been the Republican leader in the Senate forever. And this was the group that did such yeoman work in getting through Act 10, right to work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he's been, from the perspective of most things, I think, conservative and responsive. And I think most voters have a pretty strong opinion of him, and he's positioned himself in running as being a conservative member of the House of Representatives. So there wasn't a real reason to vote against him. On the other hand, Cliff DeTemple is exactly what you would want to see in American politics. He's an American citizen who's an extremely well-informed guy with strong points of view and a commitment to serve. The problem that he had here is when you're somebody who's a first-time candidate for a large office like Congress, and you've not been in public office before, it's not that not having been in public office is a disqualifier. It's that just fewer people know you, and they have, not only do they not know you, you haven't had a chance to prove to them what a great elected official you are. So if you don't know him through his business or from being in the community and so on, what would you really know? If everybody running is a first-time candidate, it becomes a wash. But that wasn't the case here. So DeTemple was taking on a Herculean challenge and taking on Scott Fitzgerald. And I don't think he ever really had much of a chance, but I think everybody who watched his campaign was very impressed by him. I just hope he doesn't bow out of politics. Your first run for office, he decided to make it for House of Representatives, but there are other guys like him. This is the sort of person we need in the state legislature, or we need we need on local school boards or the village board or any number of other offices that are out there and I understand if you're a business owner, you don't have time to take off unless you're moving for another full-time major gig like a member of the House of Representatives is, but I think everybody was positively impressed by the campaign that he ran and how he conducted himself and his knowledge of the issues and his decency as a guy and et cetera. And I just hope that after losing a race like this, and he got clobbered, Sensenbrenner won big, that isn't the end of his political career. One of the other high-profile races that we had was also because of a departure of a well-known Republican. Dave Craig is leaving the state Senate. He represents the district you kind of put yourself on the stood in southwestern Milwaukee County, and then spread yourself farther to the southwest. That's the district. It's southwestern Milwaukee County, southern Waukesha County. It takes up a chunk of northeastern Racine County, chunk of Walworth County, and down into that area. It's a big sprawling district that moves way down into Walworth and so on, southern Waukesha, et cetera. Dave Craig's district. There were several candidates that ran, and all were very, very impressive individuals. They all had very good websites. They all appeared to be knowledgeable on the issues, and so on. I indicated on my program that I thought that Julian Bradley was a uniquely strong candidate. He's a guy that has been involved behind the scenes in doing groundwork and what's the term? Grassroots work for the Republican Party and conservative politics for years. He moved to southeastern Wisconsin. Handful of years ago, he went to college in La Crosse, and every Republican in the state knows him. He's considered a very hardworking and dedicated guy. The fact that he is African American is noteworthy for a couple of reasons. First, his district is predominantly white, and secondly, there just aren't that many African American Republicans. What I have noted in the past, and I try to say this without making it sound racist, African American Republicans are often better spoken than other Republicans. And I need to explain it every time I say it. When you're an African American and a Republican, or an African American and a conservative, you're just under fire way more than, just say you're a white guy that lives out in Merton. Everybody in your neighborhood's probably a Republican too. You're not going to be challenged on it by every member of your family, everywhere you go and everywhere you turn. What happens, I think, with African Americans, Candace, just go through the whole long list of them, that because they're challenged on it all the time, in a weird way that makes them, they're really good at explaining their positions, and they're used to being challenged. They know how to defend a point of view and so on. This is why I think, so many blacks who choose to come over to the Republican side, Sheriff Clark, an example, are extremely well-spoken in the way that they present their viewpoints, and I just think it's because they're pressed on them more frequently. So anyway, Julian Bradley won that seat. It was a 5 or 6-way race. He won rather easily. He got 41% of the vote. The next highest candidate had 23%. And I believe that he will instantly be a force in the Wisconsin State Senate once he gets in there. I want to talk about a few of the other elections that occurred in the area, including a couple of state legislative races where staunchly conservative candidates on the Republican side faced Republican opponents who are not staunch conservatives, and in both instances, the conservative, won resoundingly. And News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. Brief commentary on some of the other elections that were decided in yesterday's primary election. There will be a very closely watched race in southeastern Wisconsin for the state assembly in November. This is the district that sort of straddles Brookfield and Wauwatosa. Robin Vining is the incumbent Democratic member of the state assembly, and she's all in with the anti-police protesters and the chaos that's been going on in Wauwatosa. She's one of the more extremely liberal members of the state assembly. There was a 3-way Republican primary for the right to run against her on the Republican side. And it was one of those races where I stuck my big fat nose in and suggested that I thought that Bonnie Lee was by far the best candidate. She's a staunch conservative. Her leading opponent, Linda Boucher, is a school board member who signed the Walker recall. Again, often I believe in primary elections, the voters are well informed and they tend to be conservative. So it is not surprising Bonnie Lee won with 69% of the vote. Again, it was almost an annihilation. People who take the time to vote in a primary election, especially when they might only have one, two races on the ballot, as they say, they tend to be very well informed voters, and they tend to be people who have rather strong political viewpoints. Likewise, there was an election that we spent a fair amount of time commenting on because it just had created quite a bit of buzz. Rob Brooks is a member of the state assembly, Republican from central Ozaukee County, and I'll admit that he rubbed some people the wrong way. Ozaukee County is a county that, while Republican, I don't think most people would call it like right-wingville. It's a conservative county, but not exceedingly so, and some of the Republicans are thought to be more of the moderate nature, and Brooks was thought to be vulnerable. The president of the Cedarburg School Board, a guy named Reamer, decided to run against him. The conservative, if establishment is the word, I'll use it, but the conservative leadership here in southeastern Wisconsin was on this from the beginning, and Brooks got the strong support of most of them, trying to draw attention to the fact that Reamer was a giant tax increaser in the Cedarburg School Board, and that he was openly courting Democratic voters to cross over and vote for him in the general election. Again, it's just very hard to pull this off in a primary because the voters tend to be well informed. Paul, for example, lives in that district. He said everybody knew about this race. On the other hand, you also said you had some concerns that Reamer was going to win the race. Now, as I was told geographically, Reamer was stronger in Cedarburg and the other guy, Brooks, was stronger in the southern part of the district. Paul said, as president of the school board, I don't know that president of a school board translates to the state assembly. I mean, people may well think, okay, fine, I care about the school, spend a lot of money on that, but you don't want to send a big spender to Madison. Again, that race was not close, and Brooks won in an annihilation. And one other election, there are a lot of others I could speak of, but one other race to mention. This is the district that covers southwestern Milwaukee County. It's a Republican district in Milwaukee County. The southwestern portion of the county, and I'm talking here the Franklin area and so on, has become more Republican over the years, just as the North Shore has become more Democratic. The veteran Republican incumbent is named Ken Skoronsky. He did have a primary challenge. He won it easily. This is a seat that the Democrats are targeting. They believe that they can flip it in November. And there was a Democratic primary. The candidate that's supported by the Madison establishment, his name is Malinowski, did win that race. So that will be one of the state assembly races this fall that actually will have a Republican incumbent who's going to have a fairly stiff challenge from a Democrat at a race that we will need to pay some attention to. Didn't talk about some of the Democratic primaries, but we did have an election for the Wisconsin State Senate on the Democratic side where an incumbent named LaTanya Johnson, who's one of the better-known Democrats in Madison, had a Democratic primary challenge, and if anybody had any wonders about what this was all about, they became clear today. LaTanya Johnson represents the district that's right next to Lena Taylor's state Senate district. And they don't like each other. Lena Taylor's chief of staff, Michelle Bryant, ran against LaTanya Johnson. Michelle Bryant has a talk radio program on an African-American station. She's also the person who led the charge when Lena was running for mayor to kill the Strauss meat processing plant that was to be located in the inner city and so on. With the backing of Lena Taylor, Michelle Bryant thought she could take out LaTanya Johnson. Well, LaTanya Johnson slaughtered her and won by 3-1, but that's not where the story ends. Following LaTanya winning this race quite easily, she made comments quoted today on JS Online saying that Lena Taylor is a toxic individual, impossible to work with in Madison, and no one likes her. Let me quote from Patrick Marley's story. Fresh off a primary victory, State Senator LaTanya Johnson ripped into fellow Democratic Senator Lena Taylor, calling her a toxic colleague who rarely gets along with others. There's no way that I'm going back to the Capitol and face the same treatment and the same just disrespect that I faced of her for the last 4 years. I'm not doing that anymore. So Johnson didn't really speak out and say any of these things until after she smoked badly, 3-1 margin, the chief of staff of Lena Taylor. But now that it's over, the open animosity between the two of them is, well, the animosity between the two of them is now clearly out there in the open. It's 6:00. Let me give you the word now. Citizen Summer Cash Contest. Text in word for the 6 o'clock hour. The word for this hour is bank. B-A-N-K, bank. You have until 7 p.m. to text that into 200-200. You get a text confirming entry plus iHeartRadio info, standard data, and message rates apply in this nationwide contest. We haven't done a lot of commentary because everybody else in the world is talking about Kamala Harris being chosen as Joe Biden's running mate. But there is an interesting story that's out there. And as you know, Harris is, we're talking about the feud between Lena Taylor and LaTanya Johnson. There are a lot of Democrats that don't like Kamala Harris. And the fact that she ran for president and took a lot of shots at her opponents. And remember all the shots that Tulsi Gabbard took at her, in which Tulsi Gabbard essentially said that she was trying to present herself as members of a minority group that she's not part of. Not to mention the fact that she's a political chameleon and opportunist who will do anything. It is creating, and this is more so on the left than it is the right, this question about whether or not Kamala Harris should be presenting herself as African American. Now, I'm going to expand on this in the next segment, but We're in an era right now where people are allowed to identify as being a member of whatever group that they want. Apparently, if I want to identify as an NFL quarterback, I'm allowed to do that. So, should the term African American be an actual description of ethnicity? Is it a race or is it a choice? I think most conservatives don't care. They consider all of us to be American, and they think that we are obsessed with this, which hyphen is where and which group you identify with. But it's on the left that this becomes a big deal, and it was especially made to be a big deal because of the pressure that was applied on Joe Biden that he had to choose A, woman, and B, an African American. The life story of Harris herself, as she chooses to tell it, is also raising questions on the left. And you may recall that during the primary, Harris viciously went after Joe Biden, who she now chose, but also had some bad moments with the Bernie Sanders crowd that just doesn't like her.
It's a living thing.
News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. Obviously, a lot of Republicans are going to be playing video over the next several months of Kamala Harris during the debates when she took on Joe Biden, which seemed to weaken Biden at the time, but they really weakened Harris, that she just came across as mean, lacking humor, and she rubbed a lot of Democrats the wrong way. But you may recall that she called Biden a racist, citing some of Biden's positions in the past, including his crowing about Delaware being a segregated state back in his younger days. Anyway, the attacks that were put on Harris from other Democrats running, and you may recall that I was encouraging everybody to watch those wild Democratic debates, even though they just about it in the guy that everybody thought was going to win anyway in the first place anyway, Joe Biden winning the thing. You had a lot of Democrats that were trying to make names for themselves, and they were fighting with one another. And you had Tulsi Gabbard, who is the congresswoman from Hawaii, who went after Kamala Harris, saying she was trying to present herself with phony racial credentials. Gabbard criticized Harris for stressing her blackness, pointing out that depending on how do you define the term, and I'm sincerely not trying to offend anyone here, I'm just dealing with the fact that we live in a society that is a melting pot, yet we try to create these categories of black, white, Latino, other, and more people fall into groups that become impossible to define on those terms. But Kamala Harris is the vice presidential running mate because Joe Biden needed to choose a black woman. Everyone knows that was a criteria, and he was put on notice by Democratic leaders only a few days ago that he better not go and choose the governor of Michigan, that he needed to choose an African-American woman. And the belief is that he needs to, A, shore up the woman's vote, but also there's this fear that Donald Trump is going to do better than most Republicans normally do with African Americans. And the best way to try to prevent that is to have an African American on the ticket. So Kamala Harris's race and ethnicity does become an issue. Furthermore, she's used it herself throughout her career. I frankly don't know what term you're supposed to apply. If she identifies herself as black, I'm not going to quarrel with that. Is she African American? I don't know what that means anymore. I really don't. If someone says they're Italian American, I take that as meaning that their ancestors came from Italy, but they live in America now. African American becomes more complicated. First of all, Africa is not a country, it's a continent. It takes in a lot of countries. Egypt, a country that's predominantly white, for heaven's sakes, is in Africa. Kamala Harris is half Indian and half Jamaican. Does that make her African American or not? I don't know. But saying that you're half Indian and half Jamaican, well, an interesting life story, doesn't give you the same shared experience as someone who is a black American. It's a life experience, but it's a different one. There have been suggestions, they've been refuted, that some of Harris's ancestors in Jamaica actually owned slaves. And the history of Jamaica was that a lot of people of wealth owned slaves in Jamaica with the And the economy in that country today has still suffered as a result of never embraced giving everybody full economic rights. If we are going to, as a country, polarize ourselves even more than we already are, with statements like, to revisit the earlier topic, Black Lives Matter, as opposed to accepting the statement that gets you in trouble when someone says all lives matter, how do we know anymore even what someone is? Now, many people raise the issue with Barack Obama's candidacy in the first place. We all know that his father was black and his father is black and his mother was white. And it's accepted that someone who is mixed race is indeed black. Whether you accept that or not, that is what our society has determined, that we're willing to consider someone of mixed race, that their race is black and not white, even if their ethnicity is equal to both of those groups. When we started moving away from skin color and turned it into an ethnic statement, African American, it has complicated this question, and it especially complicates the question for individuals who are new to the United States from Africa, who indeed literally are African Americans in not ancestry, but now may have grown up in Africa and came to the United States. The world is becoming very much like Giannis, who grew up in Africa, then grew up in Europe, and finally came to the United States. Trying to come up with a term for him with all of those hyphens becomes almost impossible. I would merely suggest that Kamala Harris not continue to stress her race and ethnicity when it's not very clear to anyone which particular group she's supposed to be a member of. In an ideal world, she would be an American and a success story whose parents came from two very different places, and she came to California, became a big shot, and now might become the vice president, eventually president of the United States. But it is the left and not the right that has created this obsession with race. It is the left, not the right, that has a census form that has 47 different boxes with which you can fill out. And as Tulsi Gabbard herself, a person of mixed race, pointed out in the debates, Kamala is out there presenting herself as being a member of whatever group is convenient to her at the time. One other thing about her. Everybody talks about all the facelifts that Pelosi has. Well, the one thing about Harris, it's also like Joe Biden, there are just a lot of lefties that don't like her. They're all making fun of the fact there's these, you've seen the before and after pictures of Kamala Harris, haven't you? She looks 15 years younger than she did during the debates. That was only 5 months ago. So if you wonder where she went after she dropped out of the race as quickly as she did, I think we know where she spent her COVID-19 break. It's the Bucks game last night. Very, very good that the Bucks have one game left. They still have to play the Wizards before the season ends. You know why that's very, very good, don't you? Excuse me. I don't know who they have to play. They have to play one more game before the season ends. You know why that's good? They have another game, though, don't you? Because Giannis got suspended for the next game. Giannis got kicked out of last night. You could tell the guy is just fed up with the way they beat him up all the time, and they beat him up because he can't make his free throws. They just figure we're gonna stop him. We'll mug him every time he goes to the basket. We can't just hack him a little bit because he's so strong he makes a shot anyway. You got to belt him so hard that he doesn't make a shot, knowing he's not going to make his free throws. So he just got fed up with it. He headbutted a guy and he's suspended for the next game. The game is meaningless because the Bucks regular season is an ultimate irrelevancy. That game they played last night, they cleared out the entire bench the Bucks did against, I think it was Washington they played. Didn't recognize a single player on the other team. So the Bucks playing nobody still managed to win. They have one more game and then the playoffs start, but Giannis will not have. He probably wasn't going to play that final regular season game. Anyway, the Brewer, we talked about the Brewers at the beginning of the season with many people saying they had the best bullpen in baseball. Well, they won last night because they had 5 shutout innings from the bullpen, 4 home runs on the team. If you had to pick a Brewer who's going to hit 2 home runs, who would have chosen Manny Pena? We got one out of Judge Yorko, and as I say, the bullpen pitched 5 shutout innings of relief, and the Brewers are plugging away right in that 500 range. Couple of other stories to end the program with. We have been talking about how all across America, people are seeing their careers ruined because they make comments that some people deem to be politically incorrect. I got this information from Ed Hudak, who is the chairman of the Republican Party in Winnebago County. Winnebago County is Oshkosh, Neenah, Menasha, that area. A woman posted on social media a photo of a guy holding a sign at a rally. The sign says, "Cops Lives Matter, American Lives Matter, we all matter." That's the sign. Just a posting, she showed up a guy holding that sign. She has been fired from her job at a medical practice in Neenah called the Neuroscience Group. The photo is of a man, race to me unclear about the photo. Cops Lives Matter, American Lives Matter, we all matter. She posted that. She's been fired. As I say, I know that there are some people out there who think that it's just fine that we're purging our society of all these vile and evil right-wingers. But the more we sit back and take it, the more it's going to continue to occur. Which leads me to our final point of the program. We spent, as you know, a fair amount of time discussing the situation in Germantown where a swimming coach was canned because he criticized Black Lives Matter, and school board president said, well, they didn't make it clear enough that he was talking about the group Black Lives Matter and not just people who believe in Black Lives Matter or whatever. Okay, fine. We've established in Germantown that if you say something that somebody deems to be offensive, you could be fired. I am going to ask the residents of Germantown to do me a favor for the remainder of the school year. I am going to ask them to check the social media postings of every single liberal teacher, coach, and employee of that district. And the next time one of them goes out and takes some shot, mean-spirited as it is, against President Trump or the NRA or pro-lifers or Republicans, hear about that. And I want to see whether or not Soderbergh and the school board up there in Germantown are going to be as critical in sanctioning of hurtful comments made toward the right as they are in their zeal to purge their school district of anyone who might have a conservative political viewpoint. Somehow I just think that the teachers are going to keep shooting off their mouths in the classroom, mocking conservatives, mocking Republicans, spewing out their political point of view, demonizing everyone who disagrees, and that's all different than someone who happens to make a posting like that from the other side. So I need y'all to troll around on Facebook of everybody who works in Germantown, and we're going to stay on the alert for anybody on the lefty side who might go a little bit over the top and see whether or not the treatment will be
Just sing a song and bring